This building is a Victorian era courthouse in the Tasmanian town of Richmond, and I thought it was going to be a nice little 10-minute drawing exercise just to capture the details and the proportions of the front. Now, I've got to admit at the moment, I actually spent 30 minutes on this morning. Once I started drawing, I really just felt very tired and just wanted to go with the pace that my stamina was telling me was the right pace to go. So I did take longer, but I've got the first 11 minutes at real time where almost all of the facade, except for maybe the very top line, is drawn. But because there was a lot of hatching and because I did it relatively slowly, I mean hatching to capture the shadow that's on the front of the building, although even now I'm realizing I didn't actually do all of it. But notwithstanding that, it just took me longer, I was slower. So the after 11 minutes section is actually at 4 times normal speed, as I said, simply because there was a lot of hatching that I went relatively slowly at. Some days we just need to draw to a different rhythm to have the enjoyment that we want to have from the process. So that's what I did this morning. But there is still 10 minutes of real time. And if you want to see the hatching at a slower rate, you can reduce it down to double time by using the cog icon. So don't forget that. But I've started with the left hand of these 3 windows in this front porch section that comes towards us. It may not be quite as noticeable here, but there are doors at least on one side, if not both sides of this porch section. So I started with the left-hand window, doing my best to make it actual size so that the whole building stayed actual size or pretty close to it. Now, this is the sort of scene where I think it's important to realize, are we straight on or not? And while I think I was trying to take this photo straight on, we're not actually completely straight on. And so there is a difference between where the darkness of the glass sits on the left-hand window compared to the center and compared to the right-hand window. So I like to notice those things because the rest of the alignments that I do are going to also be affected by the slightly off-center nature of this viewpoint. And at this point, I'm just trying to see the details. In some ways, these shapes are pretty simple, so it becomes a good exercise to try and get proportion correct in that case, because we're not so fussed about ornamentation or lots of different proportions and elements. We really can just focus on a few. And this could be the sort of 10-minute daily drawing exercise done over 2 days. 10 minutes possibly on this front porch section, and then 10 minutes on the facade of the main body of the courthouse further back. And then possibly we could just do the hatching on a 3rd day. So we could get 3 days of drawing exercise out of this. Whatever works, there are no rules. So I don't know if you can tell that I'm probably going reasonable amount slower than normal. But I actually enjoyed the slower pace for once. At this stage, I wasn't particularly aware that I was going too slowly to complete this with the same sort of time limit that I do in the others. And then when I did realize that, I thought, I'm not going to worry about it. So you'll notice I deliberately didn't take these decorative sort of pilasters, I suppose they are, down to the ground at the start. I really wanted to get the windows in and then get a sense of the width for proportions, and then to come down at that point after that. Just thinking, is that line straight? No, it's not. I'll just try and straighten the line, and now it's a bit straighter. See, this is what I talk about when I talk about the need to observe and correct, if at all possible, particularly in an architectural detail such as an overhanging cornice of some sort, even if it's a thin one or a very minor one, it can really give us the chance to correct lines that slope in some way, which in my experience is most of them. And so now doing this pediment, which unusually doesn't extend beyond walls of the building as they usually do, but actually sits very much within the walls of the building. So now trying to position the top of the lower section of the facade behind, and then I decide I'll move on to these windows because I can position them quite easily, I decided, and then I can work the rest of the building around them. As long as I work to keep the proportions the same, I can relate them to what I've drawn quite easily in terms of the base of them and that cross piece, and estimating the width and then doing those little triangular tops. You'll notice with the windows, the 3 small windows I've done, I didn't black them really black. I left a few little light lines in just to give an indication of slight uncertainty as to what's beneath. I felt that looked more natural. And when I do these larger windows, we can actually see in the reference that we get a sense of light and dark behind them. It's different in each one. There's obviously something different happening behind each of those spaces. But I think where possible, it's really good to try and hatch the darkness behind panes of glass, if there is any, in a way that really does reflect what we can see. Not to just take the quick shortcut of making them all black, because while that works for some buildings, as in when that's actually happening, so it suits the building, it suits the scale, it suits the atmospheric conditions, the weather, the sun, whatever at the time, often it can otherwise make our buildings just look dead, almost like there's no life behind the eyes. I often feel like the windows are the eyes into a building. They let us have a sense of penetrating past the facade into some interior space, even if it's just a reflection of curtains, even if it's just a shadow on curtains. It reminds us that there are curtains behind this glass and that there's a room behind the curtains. And again, I realize at this point that I'm leaning down towards the right-hand side with my longer horizontal lines all the time. And I think it's partly because I'm just a bit weary, and maybe as the line goes across the paper, it starts to sag a little bit. However, I do my best to take opportunity of all these thin horizontal lines to correct it. I think it's also because I'm just not sitting square onto the paper. I did look at the base of my drawing paper, not the one that I'm drawing on, but what that sits on, and it wasn't quite straight either, and my chair wasn't quite straight, and they sound like excuses, but oops. But these are things that, see, I did another line underneath that first one to even out the discrepancy that downward wobble on the right-hand side of the line had caused. So now the overall effect is not so bad. And this is what I talk about when I talk about making slight adjustments to lines that aren't quite right, to bring them back closer to being correct, to being what we would expect to see. And I find particularly with architecture, there's so often things that we can do to just massage that line back into place a little bit. And now I'm aligning this detail at the top, this vent in the roof, for the roof. I do not imagine that a courthouse had to have a bell, so I'm sure this is just an air vent to let the hot air out. Even though Hobart is one of the most southerly cities in the world, certainly one of the most southerly larger cities in the world, it certainly can get very hot there still. As possibly you can tell by the glorious blue summer sky that we have. This was in December. this was taken, which probably sounds odd to the Northern Hemisphere, but that's how it is down under. So I'm now using this small vent space as my measuring point to do the decorations around it. I'm just fitting them around it as best they can. I'm using these decorative triangles, these incised right angle triangles flanking the air vent. And I realise as I'm looking for alignment that I haven't drawn that detail, or on the other side. And I actually forgot to draw the equivalents of those on each upper corner of the facade until I just about finished, and I suddenly realised they were there. So now I'm just checking the alignment of that. And now I've switched to double time. So that was 11 minutes, probably just over 11 minutes of real time. And now we're in not double time, we're in 4 times time. So it certainly progresses very quickly at this point. But it didn't take me much more than 10 minutes to get this outline done, which I think is a very good space, a very good step to finish at in a 10-minute practice drawing, because we're not trying to create finished drawings necessarily. If, for instance, I just want to work on my proportions, then I'm better off spending 10 or 15 minutes just working on the proportions, and then the exercise is finished, because it's for training with the proportions. And so I might do 4 or 5 drawings in a row where I just work on proportions. And if the proportions are happy, they're successful, then I might want to keep both the reference and the proportion drawing to then have practice putting hatching on or creating the effect of, say, sandstone or bricks at a later stage. And if you're finding this series, this video helpful, please hit the like button for me right now before you forget. I'd really appreciate that. And so you could, by having a week where you say work on proportions and drawing basically outlines, you can then use those outlines for a week of practicing hatching. And so now I'm just trying to suggest the brickwork. It's important when we do this sort of detail to make sure we don't get careless with lines just because we're drawing them quickly and lightly. We still need them to be in the right place because we can't adjust them. So you can see now what I was talking about before, I hope, about trying to suggest shades of darkness, different values of darkness behind these windows that also reflect the sense of there's something behind the glass that we're not understanding, but we can tell that it's there. And I realized that I didn't do the shadow under the upper part of the facade, under the corners. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. Look, even though I went slowly, I still had fun doing it. And there's nothing wrong with adjusting the pace to tie in with our mood or our energy levels. Look, I hope you have a go drawing this. It's a beautiful little structure, I thought, when I saw it. I was so pleased to find it and be able to take a photo of it for a video. So why not give it a go? The photo will be on my channel community page, of course. But hey, whatever you draw, however you draw it, for whatever reason you draw it, and in whatever time you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.